Hola, it's Joe Pardavila. This is the Forbes Books podcast, and the popularity of esports cannot be understated. Global esports revenues are expected to exceed $1 billion, and there will be nearly 30 million monthly esports viewers in the U.S. this year. So what's next for the esports industry? Last year, I spoke to an entrepreneur who's involved in the burgeoning esports gambling industry. And this week, I'm speaking to an entrepreneur who is eyeing the Charleston area as the future home of an esports stadium. His name is Mark Schuster, the CEO of Ventura Sports Group, and he's going to give us the lowdown on his proposed 120,000 square foot multi-purpose venue with a 1,600-seat auditorium located, hopefully, in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning. Good to talk with you, Joe.
Mark, I guess let's start with this. We're in this lingering COVID pandemic world. Nobody wants to do anything. And all of a sudden, I hear about this multi-purpose arena, stadium / entertainment center that you plan on building outside of Charleston and Mount Pleasant. Mark, have you gone crazy?
It's interesting how I got to announce that project, or that project got announced, because I should probably back up and say how I got started in this particular industry.
Sure.
I started in minor league baseball back in the late 80s, early 90s. And when you get in the professional baseball business, you're pretty transient. You move to a lot of places. And so I moved around up and down the ladder of professional baseball. After about 10 years or so, it brought me to Charleston to build the new ballpark downtown, Joe Riley Park downtown. So that's originally the reason why I moved to Charleston. But I moved off and on over the years to do projects, sports projects, multi-purpose venue projects across the country. And just prior to the pandemic starting a few years ago, I was meeting with cities around the country, and every time I'd go and pitch the idea of building a venue for sports and entertainment events and concerts, the idea of esports kept coming up when I'm meeting with the mayor, city council, or city managers around the country. And I was literally in the middle of Oklahoma, in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't even know the city. I thought to myself, if I'm going to plan on building this destination complex where people come, from all over to come visit, to participate in, come to our sporting events, come to our concert events, and to a larger part, come to these esports events because they travel all over the country to participate in these competitions. Why in the world am I in the middle of Oklahoma when I live in one of the most beautiful places in the country, Charleston? I should really be considering building one of these venues in my backyard, which I had not done since 96 when we built Joe Riley. So I was introduced to a council member in Mount Pleasant who thought this was a great idea, thought Carolina Park was a great place to have it because in the esports world, it starts, pretty young in middle school or high school. And I just thought the location was really good. And so that's how the entire process got started, is that I was pitching the building of these multi-purpose venues with esports as a component in other places. And I thought, boy, Charleston would be a great place for this because it's already a destination.
Esports, is it the easiest way to say it is basically it's professional video gaming, essentially, right?
Everything's changing so quickly in the esports world, but a great example would be if you see some of the successes, especially overseas. Esports started really emerging in the East and moved to the West. And one of the stories I love telling is, people say, well, is it really that popular? Well, when Beijing, China hosted the Olympics, and they built something called the Nest, and it's a 100,000 seat venue, and it was going to be used for the opening and closing ceremonies for the Olympics and host events during the Olympics also. During that year they held the Olympics, they did not sell out one event, sporting or otherwise, in the Nest. When they hosted the League of Legends tournament, which is a tournament in the esports world, they sold those 100,000 tickets in less than 4 minutes.
Wow.
And so it showed you that it's coming. Much like I really, when I look at sort of the analogies, when you looked at European soccer and how it was incredibly popular over in Europe, and then 20 years ago it started making its way to the U.S. Now it's incredibly popular here. Same thing in esports. You build these venues, and you know, people call them LAN centers, and LAN centers are really small, brick and mortar buildings where people come and they can sit at a console and play games against people who are in that room or not even in that room. But this is sort of LAN center on steroids. This is a much larger venue that we have in mind. Nothing close to what they built like in the Nest. But, you know, these will be places where like-minded people want to come together to play games and be part of that community.
Yeah, one of the things that you hear a lot about entrepreneurs nowadays, if you're going to do brick and mortar, make sure you're making money while you sleep. So, and when I first heard about this complex, Mark, I was like, oh boy, esports. But then all of a sudden I see the added layers of multi-sport, multi-venue, because a place like this, you can't just be so niche in building a facility like this if it's just esports, but giving you the flexibility to make it event space for other things makes it financially viable. And I assume, it's easy to assume that you see that as well, correct?
I mean, it's absolutely vital. I wouldn't build it without it being multiple things to multiple different groups. I mean, one of the concepts here is that if this thing is, let's call it 120,000 square feet. And that's big for a venue.
Oh, yeah.
Half of this venue, on the left side of the venue, actually is an indoor sporting center where you can play basketball, volleyball, futsal, all these other sports. You can have tournaments that you can host here where people come from all over the country to participate in these tournaments you have in your indoor venue. And then next to it is the eSports Center. And the concept here was really the reason why I combined them both, because I do them standalone, and then in this case I want to do it together, is when my daughter was traveling for tennis, and she traveled almost every weekend around the country, I would travel with her, and there was nothing to do between matches. Okay, so she'd play at 8 a.m. She wouldn't have another match until 3 p.m. And whether that was tennis, soccer, or whatever, there's a lot of downtime for these traveling sports teams when they go to a particular place. So my thought was, well, again, trying to know that you don't want to have any downtime is what are all these kids and families going to do when they're not actually playing? That's when I sort of developed this idea of combining both venues into one, and one feeds the other, especially the sports side feeds the esports side. And so you have a built-in audience when you host these tournaments year-round.
You mentioned that you want to build this in your backyard in Charleston, but why Mount Pleasant? I'm sure you saw the report recently that came out that said Mount Pleasant is like the 5th fastest growing place in terms of population, jobs, and salaries. For folks not familiar with the low country of Mount Pleasant, why was Mount Pleasant the place to be when you were looking to build a project in Charleston?
Mount Pleasant really chased me early on. That's one of the reasons why I came to the forefront. But I live here. I live, a mile from Carolina Park. And so I know the area well. I know how many families are here. I know people like to come to Mount Pleasant. It's safe. It's a beautiful place. People don't mind traveling, 15, 20 miles to come to your venue. In a perfect world, you'd want to have it in the center of the Charleston MSA, but that doesn't always work out. But knowing that you want to be in a place where families consider it to be a safe, a nice place to come to, and there are not a lot of tracts of land available for a project like this. The real estate market in Charleston and Mount Pleasant specifically is a little crazy, and there's not a lot of land available. So whether we end up in Mount Pleasant at Carolina Park or another section of Charleston, I just believe in this market as a destination for those that are traveling to come participate in tournaments, that I'd much rather, if I didn't live here, I'd much rather travel for a weekend or a week away in Charleston than in the middle of Oklahoma.
Right. Yeah. So, I've been living in the low country now for a couple years, and one thing I've noticed is things move very slow. And I don't mean in terms of like people's pace. I mean in terms of government bureaucracy. I mean, to get rubber stamped on building a house feels like it takes an eternity. So how is it building a 100,000 square foot facility in Mount Pleasant? Talk to me about that process.
Next to impossible.
Yeah.
But, they all start out with many hurdles that you have to overcome. The first hurdle is that nobody has any money to contribute. That's how every meeting starts. Yep. And there's no land available. So you got to overcome that hurdle. And then you got to overcome the hurdle of, how much traffic is this going to create for a community. because there will be events year round. But you are right. This particular city does move very slowly, especially in comparison to where I do other events. I mean, we're talking about when we do these public-private partnerships, the city, whatever city you land in, is your partner in the deal. So to be able to walk a permit through the city when the city's your partner is a very important piece to it. But it does take a while in this market. And so we're prepared for that. I mean, we know this is going to be from the moment we get all of our financing together and get the site together. It's going to take a couple of years to get the thing open.
And you mentioned private public. From what I've heard, this is mostly going to be privately funded. Did I hear that correctly?
We're looking for a scenario in which we are going to do a public-private partnership where we will be one component of the overall financing package. And when you look at venues around the country in general, they're all public-private partnerships.
Right.
I mean, I can't point to one privately financed venue in this country. There are a few in Europe that have worked long-term because, Joe, the key here is not to be successful in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the honeymoon period. The key is to build something that sustains itself long-term. And, it's difficult to do that when you privately finance it all on your own. I mean, there's a reason why these are PPPs across the country is because they need to be in order to be successful long-term.
And even it's so funny. People talk about, Jerry Jones and the house Jerry built in Dallas. That was, people forget that the city of Arlington chipped in like $300 million for that. So even when you think it's privately funded, there's always a little bit of public money involved there as well.
Well, when you really look at that deal, and I actually point to that deal when I talked to groups about this, because the mayor of Arlington used this OPM, other people's money, in his campaign to get this approved. So yes, the city of Arlington put in, I don't know, $300-400 million of their own money. Mm-hmm. But anytime you fly to Dallas and rent a car, it says $29 online. It ends up being $59 online because of the tax created to build Jerry's home over there.
Right.
Okay, so it's OPM, other people's money, which is people that like me who don't live there. Taxpayers in Arlington, other than that initial $300 million, it's coming from people from outside of Arlington.
And we've already been joking about the fact that things move a little slower here. In Mark Schuster's dream world, when do you see this facility being able to be opened and operational?
I would say 2 years from the second quarter of this year. So
Wow.
Sometime, May or June of 2020, whatever year that is.
Yeah.
It's going to take 2.5 years. It'll take a year to build, take 6 months to design, and that's going to take me a year to get all this financing in there, all the partners at the table.
And where are you now in this journey? Because I know a lot of the language I'm reading is plans and discussions and such. Where are you? Where's Ventura and Mount Pleasant when it comes to building this? At what point of the timeline are you in right now?
Well, we are talking to more than just Mount Pleasant.
Okay.
All things being equal, this is where I would like to be because I believe it's the best place for it. But we may end up, for whatever reason, financing or other reasons, related to the community not wanting more traffic here in this part of Mount Pleasant. We could end up somewhere else. But just as a response to the question, I think we'll be in Charleston somewhere. And let me kind of go back and look at Charleston as what type of esports market it would be. I believe there's going to be an ecosystem in the esports world very similar to professional baseball, where you've got your major league markets, which have your biggest venues in your biggest cities. You then have your AAA markets, which are slightly smaller cities. And you go all the way down to your rookie cities. And the rookie cities would have these, glorified land centers of 2,000 to 3,000 square feet. I see Charleston, because of the destination city, as being one of those major league markets, AAA or major league market. So the reason why we're building it this big, or potentially this big, is because I view this market as a major league market.
And it's funny, too, because if you notice in the area of Charleston, they basically have one large venue, which correct me if I'm wrong, it's the North Charleston Arena where they have all their concerts. But even then, they don't always attract A-list talent. They'll get like maybe A minus, B plus, but like the A acts will probably go to a Charlotte or a bigger city in the South. Do you think building something like this will change that and open the doors to like more A-list talent to come to town?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, we've done concerts over the last 30 years. It's a big piece to our budget, and our pro forma is doing musical entertainment events. We've done that for a long time. And the A-list artists are all controlled by the folks that actually own the venues too.
Right.
30 years ago it wasn't that way, but now it is. The AEGs of the world own the talent and they own the building. And so, what we've contemplated in this venue is a 1,600 seat auditorium, which can have not only eSports events that you host, but then you have watch parties where people come and watch in other, people play games in other cities and
right.
tournaments. And that particular venue also can serve as a venue to have boxing and mixed martial arts and small concert events capped at 1,600 people. I do believe there's a niche market there for between 1,500 to 2,000 people in a beautiful venue that we can be really successful in when it comes to live music.
And so you mentioned that Mount Pleasant is not the end-all be-all for this project. Are you allowed to say what other cities you're looking into?
If you know Charleston, which you do now, we talk to everybody.
Yeah.
And we have. I mean, we've talked to West Ashley, we've talked to North Charleston. There is, I think, we'd love to end up in what they call an opportunity zone.
Yeah.
An opportunity zone is the area just north of King Street downtown. It goes all the way up to the Navy Yard in Charleston, and that creates its own financing vehicle, opportunity zone funds. But ultimately, we'd like to be in the right location with easily accessible for everybody in the entire market to get to without a long drive.
Is there room in the Upper Peninsula to build this kind of facility? Because I know in Mount Pleasant, there's plenty of land, whether it's for sale is up for debate, but there's or allowed by the community. But is there even room at that Upper Peninsula? Because I know it's exploding. I think I saw a story where there's currently 20 cranes right now on the peninsula building something. Would there be room to build something like this there?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to be in that peninsula area.
Yeah.
I really would. And if you found a tract of land, which we have not found yet, you'd have to go vertical. You couldn't do the 120,000 square feet all in one level. You'd have to have 3 levels of 40 or 2 of 60, just because there's not enough land available.
Yeah. I mean, I think me, as someone who's still sort of an outsider, only been down here a couple years, I wonder what the reaction to be, and I'm going to be full disclosure. So the only reason I found out about this, Mark, is I was walking my dog, and a lady was telling me, man, I can't wait to move out of here. I'm like, why? This is a lovely area. She goes, oh, they're going to be building like a stadium down the street, and this place is already crazy with traffic. So do you feel like you may get some sort of pushback from not the lawmakers and the people that rubber stamp this stuff, but the actual community about building something like this in Mount Pleasant?
I think you have to understand, Joe, that if I looked at building this in the middle of Nebraska, there would be about 50 people lined up calling me an idiot and saying I don't want it in this community. Okay, so it just comes with the territory.
Yeah.
It just does. And so no matter where I end up potentially building this, there's going to be people who don't want additional traffic or don't want a venue of this type in their area. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially the way, mentioning Mount Pleasant's one of the top 5 growing cities, this would obviously be a capper to it if you were able to build a facility like this, because all of a sudden Mount Pleasant doesn't become sort of like this open secret. Because people who come to Charleston, when they come to the beaches here, may not even realize that when they're going to like a Sullivan's Island or Isle of Palm, that's basically Mount Pleasant. So they may not be thinking they're vacationing in Mount Pleasant, but they very much are, as opposed to vacationing in Charleston.
It's very true. It's very true. I mean, this is a gem of a place. It really is. And if we can figure out how to get this thing built over in Mount Pleasant, we want to do it, because it's a beautiful place to come to. You've only been here a short period of time, but in seeing this place grow, I mean, when I first moved here, Carolina Park was in the sticks. I mean, there was nobody living anywhere close to. And now you have beautiful communities, a safe place to live, great schools. I think it checks off a lot of the boxes.
All right, and lastly, let's talk about the sort of the results, the execution, how these other cities have done it. From what I understand, about 5 other cities have esports stadiums that are similar to your plan in Philadelphia, Arlington, Vegas, Oakland, and in Southern California. How are they doing? Are they thriving? What can you tell me about those?
I've been to the one in Arlington. It's the renovated convention center, not far from the new Cowboys Stadium. Not so new anymore, but I've been to that one. Beautiful infrastructure on the inside. The one in Vegas is inside the Luxor. I have not been to that. Fusion Arena in Philadelphia, I think, is close to completion, so they don't really have any real data as to how they're doing. I know Arlington is doing well, and there's a lot of talk now around the country, similar to me, a lot of groups that are actually a lot larger than me, talking about building much larger esports venues. If you look at not only the story I told you earlier about the Nest and how popular this is, Toronto announced, 6-7 months ago that they're going to build a $2 billion esports facility. And so, when you start talking money like billions, where we're not even close to that, and not even the same universe, somebody's done their homework and they have the data to back it up.
And I started this conversation, Mark, by joking, which is, it's a terrible joke, but I'm all about gallows humor, about trying to build something like this during a pandemic or this lingering pandemic. In the back of your mind, fears of people coming out in droves to an arena like this with COVID still, in our foreseeable future, can't see it not being part of our lives, but any worries about that, ways to combat that, handle that? What are your thoughts on that?
I really go back to when I go and I meet with cities about potentially building this or other kinds of multipurpose venues. Everybody has the same stance. It's very similar to what I feel too, and that is we are going to get on the other side of this, and people are going to want to get back out and about and be part of sporting and other events. It's going to happen. And if we were building this to open 2 months from now, would I be worried? Yes, I would. But we're talking about 2.5 years from now. And I just believe that, it may actually change the way you design the venue, because it's always been my belief, and I say this more from when I go to a sporting event. I don't want to go sit in a traditional seat. I want to sit in the gathering area where I'm standing up at a table and I can move about and do whatever. And so, we've since we've been in the middle of design, on this, it's not going to be all traditional seating like you've seen in the past. And that's because of COVID. People are going to change the way they go to events, or they want to go to events in newer venues.
His name is Mark Schuster. He's the CEO of Ventura Sports Group. Mark, it sounds like a fascinating concept. You're taking a big swing here. I wish you the best of luck, and I can't wait to see what happens.
All right, Joe. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome, Mark, and that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.